to talk about something that's pretty important, and that's specifically MRP, or Material Requirements Planning, or Material Resource Planning, or whatever you'd like to call it. Now, this is a new session. We've not done this one before, and what really prompted this is we've made some pretty significant enhancements to our system, at least as far as the MRP is concerned. And what's fun about it is it's not even in the MRP that we made the enhancements. What we've done for users of the Master Scheduling and MRP module, and I know we have some users in here today, that will appear as MS on your menu, or M/S on your menu. If you're running that module in 1204, you'll see these new features. If you are not running that module and you're interested, certainly talk to your Passport partner, or talk to Dave Dorsey, our manufacturing sales consultant. He can assist you with that as well. Again, I'd like to talk about this from the perspective of what we call moving MRP to the front of class. We're going to talk a little bit about what I mean by that as we move along. So let's take a look real quick at what we're going to be talking about specifically today. We're going to talk a little bit about, why use MRP? Really, what is it? But why should we use it? Who can it help? We're going to take a look at the new features that I'm talking about, that moving MRP, the material planning function, to the front of the class. We're going to go through some examples of that in the application. I'm going to open up for some questions. We'll do a little Q&A. If anybody has them, again, submit them. We'll be happy to answer them at that point. Then we're going to come back in. We're going to talk a little bit about how does the traditional regenerative MRP process still help, because it's still a very important piece of the puzzle. And you'll see a little bit more what I mean by that as we move along. And then we'll come back and we'll do a little recap, kind of go back through how this can help and so on. So that said, one last time, make sure you're submitting those questions using the Q&A tool or even the chat tool, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can online, and if necessary, we'll get together offline and go through those questions with you. So, all right, so let's move forward. Let's start real quick with the last thing on earth we like to do, right? Let's look at a definition. What is material requirements planning? MRP is simply production planning, scheduling, and inventory control system used to manage your manufacturing processes. Now, this is important. Most MRP systems are software-based. It is possible to conduct this by hand, and we have, worked with numerous customers that have gone ahead and done just that. They've been doing this manually, and they've been doing it manually for some time. So the point is you don't really know what you're missing in many cases. Folks say, oh, we get by. Well, yeah, getting by is great. The question is how efficiently are you getting by, and could you be doing a whole lot more? So let's explore this a little bit. So again, I mentioned we're going to talk about why we might use the MRP software. Well, here's a fun part. We can reduce our inventory. Reducing our inventory is a pretty big deal for a lot of companies. And I like to share a little example of a company that we work with. I've been encouraging to use the material planning functions in the system for a lot of years, but they were comfortable doing what they were doing. They were still doing that aspect of it offline, even though they had software to help them online. I happened to be logged into their system one day on a support issue, and I spotted something. I spotted the fact that they had about 3.5 years worth of an 80-cent part in inventory. It represented about $3 or $4 grand in money being tied up on an 80-cent part. The purchasing agent bought it because he got him for a nickel less than he would have paid for him otherwise. He had 3+ years in stock, and they hadn't purchased it in at least 1.5 years. Well, that means he's tied up at least 5 years worth of inventory. It's sitting on the shelf, and it's just an asset sitting on your shelf, and it's chewing up your capital. It's unnecessary. To save a nickel per piece, did he save some money in the short haul? Sure. Is he hurting them in the long haul? Yeah, because that wasn't the only item. And we use that as kind of the jump-off point to start implementing more of a material requirements planning function. So one of the things this can help us do is ensure that we have the materials we need when we need it. That's a big deal, because we don't want to be delivering things. If I tell a customer I can deliver something on May 1st, I want to deliver it on May 1st. I don't want to deliver it on the 5th. I want to deliver it on the 19th of the following month. We want to deliver it on the 1st. This is a tool that helps us ensure that we keep the material flowing through in a timely fashion. It's faster than doing it manually. And I mean faster. It's a whole lot faster than doing it manually. Anybody who's made the transition from doing a manual material planning function to automating their material planning function using an MRP tool will certainly attest to that. And I'm talking huge, huge, huge difference. It's more reliable and accurate than doing it manually. Why? Well, because we're less apt to make mistakes transposing things from one place to another, be it in a spreadsheet, on a piece of paper, or just working things through in my head. You'd be amazed, and maybe you wouldn't, maybe some of you folks are doing this yourselves, how many people are licking the proverbial thumb and walking through the warehouse trying to figure out which way the wind's blowing and determining what they need to order based on what they see. This goes much further than that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Big side effect here, right? We improve our on-time deliveries. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about here just a moment ago. By having the materials we need, as we need them, we can turn product over faster. We're not, tying up production, waiting for materials. So who benefits from this? Well, very often we associate MRP with make-to-stock companies. A make-to-order company can really benefit from this as well. They can react faster to their finished goods and raw material needs. What's that mean? Well, they know what they need, and they know how much of it they need, and they know when they need it. So we can turn these things over quickly. Now, most make-to-order environments also work in a little bit of a hybrid situation where they do some make-to-stock. So we can manage both aspects of that business. That's not always true, but in most cases they are going to stock some materials to allow them to be able to turn things over quicker. And MRP is going to help us ensure that we're going to have the right materials as we need them. Make-to-stock companies, again, this is where we traditionally associate MRP is with the make-to-stock type of company, but this can help a company level out their production and ensure they're stocking what they need as they need it. We work with a customer in Cleveland that makes medical devices, and these folks live and die by a forecast. They have product lead times that go out 6 months because they bring in raw materials that are only found in China. So they're really bound to getting that material out of China, if not directly, then indirectly through some of their suppliers. The point is they have to plan in advance in order to have the materials available. Are they stocking finished good units on their shelves all the time? No. But they're very often using their forecast to drive ordering of their raw materials to come in a timely fashion so that they can turn over finished good orders quickly. So the point here is most companies can benefit, particularly if you're making complex products that use a lot of different materials or sub-assemblies or have longer lead time parts on them, if you need to do any kind of a forecast, or even if you've got safety stock requirements that you need to be able to meet, be they for contract purposes with a customer or simply to help you turn orders over a little bit faster. All right, so now we're actually going to get into the software. We're going to take a little poke around and we'll take a look at some of the things that I'm talking about. For those that are new to this is Passport. This is our menu structure. You'll see lots of modules here. Predominantly today we're going to be focused in a couple of areas. They're going to be in the Master Scheduling MRP, but we're going to expand on that because one of the things I refer to when I'm talking about moving MRP to the front of the class is we can kick off the material planning process right at the point that we place a sales order. Now, this is one of the new features I mentioned earlier when I first started the presentation. So let's take a look at what I mean by that. We're actually going to enter a new sales order in the Passport. So we'll enter an order for Elliott Enterprises. Let's give them a purchase order number here. Yeah, that's a bogus number. All right, we're moving into the line items at this point. What we're going to do is we're going to order our traditional product here, our wagon. And I want you to take a look over here to the right. As soon as we enter our item, our warehouse assumed is main. We can change that warehouse, but we're working in our main warehouse. It shows us some supply and demand information over to the right-hand side. It shows us what's on hand, what's allocated to other orders, what's on order currently, and it nets all that together, and it shows us how it nets it together here to give us a total available number. In other words, once I take all that into account, I have 57 units available to me. Okay. Now we haven't entered a quantity ordered yet. That's gonna get picked up down here once we do as a potential shortage or not. And what it's also going to do, I want you to kind of keep your eye down here on what this set of fields down here does, because we have an ability to automatically create or launch a shop order. A shop order is just a production order. We can do that right here from the sales order. Now, traditionally, we'd use this in a make-to-order environment, but you might consider doing this even in a make-to-stock environment with these new features. Not for everybody, and we can turn this option on and off. So let's put in a number here. We're going to order a quantity of 50. Remember, we have 57 available. And as soon as I hit enter or tab, what happens is the program reaches out, because I'm running the master scheduling and MRP module, and it checks our rules for this particular item. In addition, what it's doing actually before even it checks the rules, it's checking to see if it has enough available here to satisfy this demand. And because it does, it doesn't see a need to order anything down here from production. Now, if we change that number, so let's bump that number up to 100 units. So now our total short becomes 43. And then down below here, you see that we have a recommended order quantity of 100 units. And those are due on 4/20. Why? Because I've got my scheduled ship date set to 4/20, which is today. Normally, we would have a scheduled ship date out into the future. But for the purposes of this example, what you're seeing here is the system has actually reached out and it's checked and said, okay, well, I have to order something. I need 43 units in order to satisfy this requirement. So once it realizes it needs to place an order, it's going to go ahead and set up the process to do so. Now, what's unique here is it's actually reaching out to the item master that we're selling. So let's go take a quick look at that item. We're looking at the actual item master file itself right now. And what we see here, if we look down the bottom left, is we see that we have some material planning rules. And those material planning rules, in this case, we have one set. And that one that is set is our minimum order quantity. And we've set that to 100 units. Well, that explains why it is we end up with an order quantity of 100 here. We only need 43. If there were no rules set, what would have happened was this would have ordered 43 for us. But because we have an order minimum set, it applies that material planning rule to this function, and it actually goes ahead and it takes that into account. Now, this is doing far more than that underneath the hood. What it's also doing is it's taking into account things like safety stock. It's taken into account, we'll go back and look at that item real quick. It'll take into account safety stock. So if I need more material because this is going to dip me below my safety stock level, and the system knows that we need to keep some safety stock on file or on our inventory shelves, it'll go ahead and it'll actually increase the order to accommodate for that as well. It'll also take into account our order multiple rules, and that means if we have to order something in pairs and 24 because they go in a case, or whatever number it may be, make one up. It'll actually adjust for that as well. So what's happening is we are literally taking that material planning process that's normally done well after the fact, and we're actually implementing that right up front at the point that we're placing a sales order. So that means we're able to react faster to our customer demand, and in this case, other potential demand that's out there. We'd even pick up if somebody forgot to create a shop order for some other need in our system, it'll pick that up as well, and it'll accommodate for that in here. What is it that this doesn't do for me? It's not handling rescheduling. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. But what it isn't doing is rescheduling. Right now, it's going to schedule this to best meet my demand for this particular sales order line. And that's where the regenerative MRP process still comes into play. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to click Save at this point. And we have a few questions we can go through at some point if we're doing any kind of training with you. I'll go ahead and just answer those quickly. So we know we now have a shop order on file for this 158712. Okay, we created that order directly from our sales order, and off she goes. So at this point, again, we have taken care of our planning for our parent item. We've created a production order that will allow us to produce that item in our system. So we're going to go into, in this case, shop floor control, not necessarily required to take advantage of this. And here we see our shop order or production order that we just created. Now, what we have here is a simple order. It says, hey, start it here, finish it there. It's got a 2-day lead time. Here's our quantity. The sales order we created it from, because we did create it from a sales order, will always cross-reference itself. And by the way, the order number will match. So we have a status at this point of open. Now, the next step in working with a shop order is we perform an explosion process. What the explosion process does, let's go back to our presentation here real quick. The explosion process will take a complex bill, and this is just a kind of a graphical representation of one, where we're making item A, or let's call it our wagon, right, the MLRW-2. We're making an item A. In order to make item A, we have to purchase some item B's and C's, and we also need to make something else, right? We need to make this item D. We have a sub-assembly in this situation. Well, what's going to happen is when I explode my order to make this item A, and it encounters the requirement for item D, what it's going to do is it's going to automatically go through the process of checking inventory to see if we have enough of this thing in stock to produce, or to be able to produce our item A. If so, it just allocates it and moves on. Now, users prior to version 12.04 have that same basic capability. Big thing is it's only looking at the quantity on hand, and it's subtracting quantity allocated from it. It doesn't concern itself with anything else that might already be on order. And without MRP, we assume that that's not available to us. So it's going to go ahead and just create the requirement based on that valuation, right? Do we have enough in stock after we take away our other requirements to satisfy this need? And what we do is, if we don't have enough to satisfy this, is we go ahead and we create another shop order automatically, and we'll create it to produce enough materials to satisfy this requirement. Now, that's going to get repeated down below here. When we encounter E, it's going to repeat that process, check inventory, and decide whether it needs to order something or not. Now, what we've introduced here, and to accomplish all this, we would use a multi-level explosion. To do this, what we do is we have this apply MRP rules function. By checking this off, we're going to do just that, but we're going to take it further. We're actually going to take into account, again, just like we did with the sales order, safety stock, order minimum, order multiple. We're going to take all those rules into account, and it's going to see if there's other requirements that aren't being met somewhere else. As it finds those, it's going to use that if it determines it needs to produce one of those sub-assemblies. So if it decides it's got to make an item D, it'll first determine whether or not it needs to make a shop order for this, and if so, that's when it applies the rest of the MRP rules and makes a determination as to how many at the end of the day we really need to order. So in this case, we're going to check that box off, we're going to click OK, and we're going to view the results as a PDF. So she goes a-churning away. It's going down through, this bill has 3 levels, as I recall. Oh, threw it up on my other screen here. This bill has 3 levels, and we see the relative level over here. We've got a bunch of level 1 sub-assemblies here, and then a couple of level 2s down the bottom. But what this has done for us is it's gone through the process, and it's determined that we need some of these, and we don't need these. I mean, we actually do need them. However, it found sufficient inventory on file, so it was able to apply that. And as such, it tells us that inventory was applied, and we don't need to place an order for that. So the wagon bodies are going to be just fine. We don't have to do anything with that, and so on as we go down the list. Now, what this has also done for us is it's taken into account lead times, so it's back scheduled for us each of these sub-assembly orders so that they're being done in time to start the next process. So our level 2s will be done in time to start our level 1s. Our level 1s will be finished in time to assemble our finished unit. So it's a pretty sophisticated process. Now, if it determined it needed to create an order, as it did here for item 2000, or even down here, let's see, item 3000. What it did was it found we actually needed 200 units in this case. Well, it ordered 700. Why in God's name did it order 700 units? Now, we can determine that in a hurry by coming back into our item master and looking at item 3000, and we see that though we needed 200 units for that particular order, this item has a safety stock level of 500. So it's accommodating for our safety stock requirement here that hasn't been picked up by MRP yet. Again, we are moving the material planning to the front of the class. We're catching these things much earlier in the process so that we can automatically start planning for things. Now, what do you need in order to be able to do that? Well, we need to intelligently define some rules for those items that we need to do so on. If I have things I need to keep safety stock on, define them. go crazy with safety stock. Make sure we're not setting safety stock for everything in our system. We do that, we're never going to reduce our inventory. In fact, we'll increase it. But if we're smart about the way we structure our rules, we should be able to reduce our inventory and turn things over faster. So again, we have moved some of the actual MRP functions up into this explosion process. The natural process, if you're an existing user that you're using today, that has gone ahead now and created for us a series of orders that'll be picked up by our scheduling, and those shop orders will accommodate for all of the requirements that we have for our wagons on there. So here, you know what? Let's go back in there real quick. Go to the end of the list here. It's a nice, fast process. So here's the sub-assembly orders for the various items that need to be produced in order to satisfy this. Here's that 700 units of our red wagon axle. So it's gone through and done some significant planning for us. That is a huge time saver for companies who are sitting down trying to figure out what they need to be making and when, and then trying to figure out manually, what materials do I need to make it all come together? We've just taken care of a bunch of that. So with MRP, what we're doing here is we're just really trying to align supply and demand, right? I mean, we're taking shop orders, purchase orders, and in the case of MRP, we have suggested planned orders and firm planned orders. We're taking our various forms of demand, shop order material requirements, sales orders, suggested planned order requirements, even safety stock and forecast if we're going to get into those things. And we're taking all that into account and we're trying to make them jive. Now, we've done some of the jiving here in so much as by creating the production order from the sales order, we've done an automatic alignment to have the finished good ready in time to ship it. When we did the explosion, what we did was we also created our sub-assembly shop orders automatically. We back scheduled them based on lead time so that we'd have those ready in time for our each next level so that we can get a product out the door in time to a customer. At the same time, we went through a process of allocating all of the raw materials I needed to produce those shop orders. And for each shop order, those materials are allocated to be ready or to be in time to start the assembly process. So what that does for us is that gets us all the way down to the point where we can actually go ahead and start doing our purchase planning. Really what we're going to do is this is where we introduce, if you will, the traditional regenerative MRP process. And what does that mean? I've used the term regenerative a few times. The traditional regenerative MRP, which is what our master schedule in MRP is and always has been, it's actually probably the most common MRP that you'll find out there still. What it is, it's a process where we run we call it an MRP explosion. Some people will call it a regeneration. There's various other terms that you might have heard it referred to. But what it does is it takes a snapshot of all of our supply and demand as of the moment the process is run. And what it does is it siphons through it all. It figures out what exactly it is you have to do in order to make it all dance. Because though we've taken care of a lot of that process through these new upfront features, as I mentioned earlier, there may be need to reschedule some of these things that we've created as a, for instance, to better align with some earlier demand so we can satisfy our new order demand, but also satisfy something maybe we overlooked, where something needs to be shuffled back a few days or a week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it is to ensure we have what we need as we need it. So we're still going to utilize MRP, and for most folks that means that, it's a once-a-week explosion. Some folks are a little more dynamic than that, and they'll run it a couple times a week. We have a customer that does this. It's a medical devices company I mentioned earlier, twice a month. For a while, they were doing it once a month, and that just simply wasn't enough because they were missing spare parts stuff. They were getting too far back on spare parts inventory. So they decided to do it twice a month. They do it, I believe, it's the beginning of the month and then mid-month, because most of what they do is based on forecasts. So they're not as concerned about constant changing demand. For a lot of the make-to-order companies, it's constant changing demand. We want to run this more frequently. Though we're going to pick up a lot of the stuff right up front before ever having to do an MRP explosion, we still want to run that explosion process periodically and review the information that's available to us. So really, what are we going to do? Well, we are going to utilize these reports in here, and really, it generally cooks down to two of them. There is a third one that some folks like. It's a bulkier report, but it provides a lot of information. We'll talk about each of these here. We're going to start with the Vendor Purchase Actions Report. What this does for us is pretty significant. It takes our purchase demand and it allows us to go ahead and it allows us to find all of the actions that are required of me now. Not 3 weeks from now, not a month from now, but now, right now, today. Now, by today, I mean it's taken into account lead times again, so it's looking out into the future. So when I mentioned that 6-month lead time part, it's looking out 6 months from now to see if there's some requirements out there that need me to act today to ensure I have the material I need for them to satisfy that demand. What we also do is we can buffer that a little bit. We usually buffer it by 5 to 9 days. So we're going to look a little bit further in advance. So if we're running this once a week, we don't get caught with our pants down. We're not always reacting at the last second. We're reacting, a few days in advance to ensure that things are getting done. So what this report does is this allows us to look at just our purchased requirements. And normally, if we were going through a training session, I would tell you that the first thing you want to do is probably look at your suggested orders. Now, we only want to see this stuff inside of our planning horizon. If we want to see stuff beyond that, great. We can look out into perpetuity by checking off the second box down here. But what I would encourage folks to do is on the first pass is just look at your suggested orders. Now, I've chosen just my planner buyer code, so I'm only going to see items that have been assigned to me for planning purposes. And I've selected that I want all item types, everything that's assigned to me I want to see. But I only want to see new order suggestions. In other words, things that need me to place a PO. When I click OK, we'll view that as a PDF. What I get is I get a list of actions, and I get them by vendor. Now, this item happens to have no primary vendor defined in its item master file, so it's listed as undefined. So I'll have to go do some hunting and figure out who I source this from and place an order for it. Now, where we have vendors defined, we can actually pull in our vendor information into the report, and it's going to group all items that require action that fall under this vendor. So in this case, these are all suggested planned orders that MRP has decided these are materials I need, and it's going to give me some order placement suggestions. Now, clearly, I'm using test data. This has got a lot of older data in it. That said, I see a series of orders. Now, I might look at this and place an order for 300 units. That's up to me. I can make that call. But in this case, it's made a suggestion for me that I want to go ahead and I want to place an order here and here so that I can have just-in-time inventory flowing through. Have 100 units in time to get something out the door here, another 200 units in to get some things out the door there. Now, this is where we can introduce order minimum as a for instance on commonly used parts, and I might end up with one single suggestion to handle multiple requirements. So that's where we can start to add some intelligence and pare some of these things down. But all of those rules are taken into account as it's making these suggestions. If there's an order minimum in play, it's going to take that into account. If there's safety stock that needs to be satisfied, that's been accounted for as well. If there's an order multiple, I order in cases of 12. It's going to accommodate for that as well, and it's going to make the recommendation accordingly. In that case, it'll always, if I need 10, it's going to suggest I order 12. So this takes a lot of the thinking out of the process, and frankly, I can place a single purchase order for vendor number 50 to accommodate for all of these needs that we see here. Even if I choose to have these come in as separate deliveries, I can still place one single order, and I can cut different deliveries against the line item where I'm ordering this 018-0325. So it'll have my deliveries come in when I need them. So I can sit down now and enter in a real fast PO. So literally, I'm going to move that out of my way. Literally, I would hop back, drop over to the purchasing module, go into my purchase orders, and enter the purchase order for vendor number 50. Off I go. And as I continue to look down my list, we'll scoot to the next page. I see I've got some things I need from Hanson Manufacturing Company. Again, there's my contact data, the whole 9 yards. So I can go ahead and place my purchase order for Hanson. And in total, I have 47 action messages I have to address. Really, under two primary vendors, and then I have one item I have to take a look on, and I know I don't have it sourced anywhere. But I have one item that presumably is a new item we haven't ordered before that I'll have to figure out who to order that from. Once I do that, I can update its primary vendor. So this allows me to logically group my new order actions, assuming we've, again, defined some primary vendors in our system. And there's multiple ways to pull that off, by the way. We can even automate that to a degree. But the idea here is to help you save time, to help you work more efficiently. To sit down and calculate all the same information might take hours, literally hours, to sit down and figure it all out. And then hopefully you get it right. The only way it's going to be wrong in here is if we set up the bill of material incorrectly or we ordered an incorrect amount. As long as those are correct, these numbers will always be correct. So that's the example of the MRP Vendor Purchase Actions Report. So what about oh, you know what, we'll go back in there real quick because I told you we'd normally do this in two swipes. I want to place all my new POs. Well, now I just want to see my reschedules. This takes into account purchase orders that are sitting out there that are, and I'll just grab it for all planner buyers in this case, any POs that are sitting out there that might need a reschedule. Why would they need to be rescheduled? Well, maybe the PO was already there, but I placed a new order and there's some demand and a little bit sooner than originally anticipated. So this is gonna flag me to expedite or in some cases de-expedite orders. It sees a requirement here. We have a due date of 4/23/10, but it sees I actually could use that on 2/3/10 instead. So it's suggesting that I reschedule that thing in to better align my supply with my demand. We scoot down another one here. We get an expedite message here, again, moving it in. Down here, we've got a cancellation suggestion. Now, you may not be able to cancel your PO with your vendor. It depends on your relationship. But in this case, it says, look, for whatever reasons you ordered this, I don't see a need for it. You should probably cancel this order. This is where we can start, again, to reduce inventory. There's less guessing. We'll go one more vendor here. We look at Vermont Metal Products, and we got all kinds of stuff. We got de-expedites, right? We've got it placed here. We don't need it until much further out in the future. Let's reschedule that out. These we need to move in to better align, and so on. So in this case, I'm looking at all my reschedules. So I can contact this vendor and say, hey, hey, John Smith, I've got these sitting out there. Can we work on these? Can we reschedule these? And heck, if you want, knock off this page and send it right to them and have them make the changes for you. Some folks aren't comfortable with that. Most folks, they get to a point where it's just as easy. Look, I'll send these to you. I'm going to make the changes on the purchase orders on this side. Let me know if there's going to be any problems with these. So this is how we would use this on, if you will, the second pass as we use that. So now, taking into account manufactured goods, how do we do that? Well, similar concept. In this case, we're using a report called the MRP Order Actions Report. Now, big difference here, we're not going to group on vendor because we may have purchased goods in here, we may have manufactured goods in here, we may have both. It's up to you what you want to look at. In this case, I'm going to select just manufactured goods. I can run this report by planner buyer, or I could go after a specific item or range of items if I want. It'll change the way things are grouped on the report and so forth. But we'll go ahead and we're going to click OK, just have a real fast look at this one because it's the same concept. It's just an action report. It's taken all of our supply and demand numbers, it's churned them out, it's telling us, hey, you need to do this. We need to open and release some shop orders here. We need to reschedule one out to better align with more of a just-in-time type of environment. In this case, we need to open and release some additional ones for this. So it's a very straightforward process. And that whole process is predicated on creating a sales order, creating a shop order, exploding it, let it do its thing. It takes seconds, minutes at worst, to get those things set up. We've done the bulk of our planning functions up front because realistically, if we're more of a make-to-order company or a nice combination of mixed mode, a lot of the stuff where we're seeing these open and releases on manufactured goods will have already been taken care of for us. That will have been taken care of when we created our shop orders automatically from the sales orders and let the explosion process handle some of the planning functions. And realistically, what we'll see in here is more reschedule suggestions than we will having to place orders just to get things to better align in some cases. So this is where the MRP starts to pay off. No more, taking our Excel spreadsheet, taking a list of stuff and plugging it into an Excel spreadsheet and trying to figure out what I need when I need it. No more of that. No more walking around looking at the shelves trying to figure it out. I actually worked with a company who literally he had a demo version of a MRP system of one sort or another, and he would key in data from his distribution system. He was using actually our ICOE. PO modules, which is our distribution stuff. He was keying in his stuff, his basic inventory numbers for the items involved, sales orders, shop orders with dates and stuff like that. And then he was running an MRP there, and then going back into Passport and adding stuff in. Well, they added our stuff, and what they saw was a dramatic reduction in their product lead times. Literally, they cut about half of their product lead times in half, and most of the rest of their products by a third. They were able to turn things over faster, which helped make them more competitive in their industry. So as we look at this, just real quick, this is something you rarely look at, but if you ever saw something and had a question, when we do the MRP explosion, we define a series of rules. Most of these are predefined in the control file, but you can tweak them on a particular run. So if you see something that looks a little funny, you can look at your rules and just make sure that they were set the way you expected them to be set at the time of the MRP run. Something to note, we can keep multiple MRP runs on file. It's kind of unusual. For folks that are kind of playing around with numbers, you're really overbooked. Maybe you want to drop your safety stock requirements for a particular run, so we're not inundating the shop with a bunch of, if you will, false demand. We call things like forecast and safety stock false demand. It's not hard demand from a particular customer order or a particular shop order. So if I want to do that for a single run, I can, and I'd be able to see that I did that inside of my rules. But those are the two primary outputs you're going to pull out of the MRP module. And again, for most folks, it's about a once-a-week thing. We execute it on whatever, Monday morning, Friday night, whatever, and we knock off the reports, we work them. Unless you're really high volume, it's probably done in a couple of hours, and my basic planning stuff's done for the week, as opposed to spending hours trying to get there and then having to go ahead and act on it. All right, so the last thing I want to touch on here is the MRP item summary. Now, I talked about these two reports, right? This one groups on primary vendor, or in the case of reschedules, if I've placed a PO with a secondary vendor, it'll group underneath the vendor the PO was placed with. This allows me to be vendor agnostic, if you will, and get a list of purchased goods or manufactured goods or a mix. I can pull them by planner, buyer, or by item, but in either event, I can see all of my actions. What needs to be done of me, and depending on how you run it, by planner, buyer, then item, or just simply by item. This last one is a little bit more expansive. In this case, I'm going to change how I'm running this one. We're going to resequence it by item number, and we're going to look at, I think the MLRW2 is the one I wanted to look at. All right, so we're going to take and view this real quick. And what this report does for us, up top it gives us a lot of information. We'll visit that in a second. This gives us our actions by item, but what it does is a little bit more than just give us our actions. This gives us a little bit more information about the schedule, how the schedule breaks down, allows us to kind of get some insight. And there's a coinciding display. I can use it to research things as well. What it does is it gives me the ability to see that I have an order minimum out there, an order multiple, and so on. It breaks down. I've just got a couple of planning periods out here. You get to set your planning periods. They can be weekly, monthly, however you want to set them up. But it shows my planning periods, and it shows my requirements and so forth, and how it impacts my overall net availability for this particular item. And then again, down below, we can see the actions it's suggesting we do. Now, as you saw, we had a lot of stuff from like 2010 through 2014, so we've got things sitting in prior periods, and that shows up here in our prior period. The point here is I can gain a lot more information looking at this. For some folks, especially in the beginning, it's kind of important because we go through the same exercise. Each time somebody new implements MRP, especially for the first time, if they've not worked with a real MRP system in the past, they get to a point where they start questioning numbers. They're seeing numbers, and they in their mind, they look at them and say, this makes 0 sense. Well, this allows us to help to start to make sense of that. Why are we telling you to do something? Well, I can see period by period what exactly is driving this thing to do stuff. And here I see what our sources are. I see a BP and I see an FB. What are those? Well, if we look up here, we see FB is a forecast balance. So we see that we've got some forecast of 60 units out over April, May, and June of this year. So that's the only new demand I'm introducing on this particular item is this forecast. All the rest of the demand is old sales orders and stuff like that that's sitting out there. And that's what this tells me. The BP, if we look up top, is backlog at primary. And that tells me that, look, I've got a whole bunch of old sales orders sitting out here for this. And that's what they are. Now, ideally, if we're running MRP correctly, we shouldn't see much sitting in here. In fact, we should see very little and ideally nothing. I'll say you'll never get to nothing. It's like when people say, I want to go paperless. So, I mean, yeah, you can go paperless. You'll never go paperless. You're always going to have some paper. But the idea here is to minimize that stuff, to have stuff turning over quickly, efficiently, moving things out the door because we have what we need as we need it, as opposed to having stuff coming in too late, too early, building up inventories of things that we don't need at all. This helps us to start to avoid those types of problems. And that's how we can result in an inventory reduction. Oh, one last point. I mentioned the ability to be able to start sourcing why it's told me to do things. Well, that item summary helps, but there also is a pegging report. We can turn on a pegging option, and that'll get much more specific and allow us to literally research and say, gee, that's why it suggested I do this. And I can tell you that I think with one exception, and I think Tom's here today, I was on site with a client not long ago. I just got through telling them we have not had to do an update to the MRP logic in, a billion years. And we ran the MRP and we had to make an update to the MRP logic. But it was the first one in a billion years because the numbers always vet out. We were able to get through and figure out what was causing the issue and get it straightened away. But they're very reliable. And if we run into a circumstance where something looks weird, we can always prove it out. What was it that made us do this? And that's very important. As you gain confidence, you'll start to just work this thing. And it's going to help you save a lot of time, and it's going to help you go ahead and, like I say, potentially reduce your lead times, sometimes dramatically, increase your order turnover, get those things out the door faster, So again, what's it going to do? It's going to help us react to our material needs faster. We don't want to get caught with the wrong inventory, right? We don't want to have a bunch of stuff that's just going to sit on the shelf for the next 5 years that we had to tie up capital to buy. We can reduce the risk of holding up a big order because you're missing a 50-cent part. We use that in the marketing campaign to help try and get you folks to come to this. That is a literal example, and actually it was a nickel part, was his quote. When we first went on site to meet with a company out in Illinois, and he said, look, he says, that order right there, it's a $10,000 order, and it's being held up by a nickel part because we didn't know we needed to order the thing. He uses MRP now. And again, we can reduce our inventory by ordering only what we need as we need it. That said, it kind of gives you an idea of some of what we can do with the material requirements planning. Like I say, it's so hard for folks that haven't had it before to really understand what they're missing. But man, it can really save you some time, save you some effort, and I'll tell you, save you a lot of mistakes, ideally save you some money by getting things down as far as your inventory costs go. And for some companies, like I say, it really helps them become more competitive.